All right, today is the day, and boy, that thing is getting heavy. We have added some new components on there and gone back and replaced the exhaust system that had troubles with. So anyway, let's go take a look at what we did. And the first thing we're going to do is put the front A-arm control brackets onto the front subframe. And I put a little bead down because I'm working here alone and need a three-handed job to be done by a two-handed person here. So I'll hold this thing in position and then remelt that bead to be my tack. And that'll hold one end for me while I get things lined up. Now this has previously been marked out really well because this control arm is kind of critical. It sits at a little bit of a cant angle to provide a little anti-dive effect, so when you hit the brakes and the suspension geometry doesn't change as drastically as it normally would if it was all parallel. And I'll show you that here in just a second. So this end is high up in the front and tapers back a little bit. Like I said, that's to control a little anti-dive, changing your toe geometry when you hit the brakes. Now, once I got those control arm brackets done, I'm going to disassemble this whole thing so I can turn it over with that differential in there and the steering rack and stuff getting kind of heavy. I do not have the control arm done for the lower, and so we will not be putting those brackets on this one, but I'm going to add some other components here for your viewing pleasure. Anyway, steering rack comes out. And then I need to take out a couple of bolts for this differential. Like I says, the differential being somewhere about just shy of 100 pounds comes out. Now I can flip this thing over conveniently. Because I need to add some brackets. Of course, that's what this whole episode is about, is brackets. Now that shock mounting plate is kind of welded to the center of that tube, but that's a lot of moment in the arm in that bracket, so I'm going to add 4 little sub brackets that go underneath that tie that whole thing in to form our positions around that tube. Keep it from twisting or rotating when the shocks both have high loads on them. These aren't very critical. You're just spacing them out, one in the front of the bracket, one in the back of the bracket up above. Tack them on the top and the bottom. And then I'll flip it around for you to see what I'm talking about with those 4 brackets in there. Strengthen that point for those shock absorbers. Now here the camera was out of whack, so you didn't get to see me grinding the bottom pega points off that we had previously done, but that operation is done, ready for when we have the new brackets ready to go. So we're going to switch now to the rear subframe. Now the upper control arm on the rear also had the bad brackets that I mentioned before in another video, why I'm converting to these new brackets, but the old ones coming off. Now luckily they were just tack welded in there. For some reason I decided on that lower front control arm to completely weld it, so it was a kind of a chore to grind it off. After a little grinding and pounding, it comes off. And then we'll take us a flapper sander and clean this up really nicely to accept our new and improved control arm brackets. Once that's ground down nice and smooth, we can get ready to put those in. Now this one being another critical one, I just decided to bring in extra hands, brought my son in. He's going to hold it in position. Now the height of this is actually 1/16 above the surface of the subframe tube, so you can see that little piece of sheet metal, those little rulers running under it to keep that 1/16. And while he holds it in position for forward and back, I will tack weld. And I can only get a small tack weld on these right at the tips of those brackets because I do have the polyurethane bushings in those control arms, so I don't want those pega point brackets to get hot. So just a small enough tack that the subframe, the tubing for the subframe will absorb most of the heat and won't make it up to those bushings. Once I got all those top surfaces all tack welded, I can let him go and go back and finish tack welding all the bottoms. Now there's 3 brackets on here of the 4. So 2 of those are bolted tight against one of those bushings. And I'm going to make sure they're all tack welded perfectly. And then take my bolts out and switch it and put in the bracket. So you're going to see something here. It might seem kind of confusing, and that's what I'm doing. So you see there's only 3 brackets. Now rounding up the 4th one. Kind of put it back together, but put the bolt in from the opposite side so that I can pinch down on the other opposite side urethane bushing to get it to square up perfectly with the bushing. And once I've got it tightened up, I can go ahead and tack weld it as well. I guess I'm testing here just to make sure that I don't have one of those brackets at a little bit of an angle to bind on that thing. Seems to be rotating nice and smooth. Hold it with my knee and tack weld it. And everything seems to look good. Now once I have these upper control arms in place, then I can also have the alignment ready to set my coilover shocks into place. Magically appears. Now when I have these parts water jet cut, I usually go 1/1000th over for a bolt size, but even then didn't quite seem to fit, so just take a sanding cone and open those up just a fraction more, just enough that both bolt slides in nice and tight. Do the other side while I'm at it. And then I'll also have to remount the holes on the upper control arm because they fit at one time, but then after powder coating, found out that the powder coating, of course, took up the space for the fit. So run my sanding cone through there and take the powder coating off. Too bad it's gone. Lose a little bit of water protection there, but we'll coat it with a little oil and the lube of that bushings. Clean it up. Now that our bolt fits through, we can install our coilover. And if you look behind the A-arm, you can see now we have a bracket that we're going to be welding to the 2 tubes of the subframe that go across there. And the base plate, which is moving right now, will not move in the end. It will actually be fixed. And then the little plate on top of that, you can see if you look closely, there is a row of holes so that I can be able to adjust that shock for ride height. Anyway, a little more ride height beyond the compression of the spring. So between the ride height adjustment on the base plate and the ride height of the spring, we should be able to have quite a bit of adjustment for that. And once I get it all locked in position onto the A-arm and onto that plate, I'm going to tack weld it, of course. And then I found that that plate just kind of sitting a little bit of a canted angle. And another 3-handed job with a 2-handed man. So I'm going to go grab me a little chunk of wood to kind of hold it square while I get one more tack on it. That's all it is for that. Just tack in each corner. Like I said, I'm going to go back here and do a large or a long welding day and get all these things all put back together. Of course, I'll be having to pull the engine and all the components out of here to be able to roll this whole thing over and to do that. Now, once that shock's in place, the control arm's in place, I'm going to add a little couple of stiffening brackets to hold some lateral movement. There's also one more toe length that's going to go onto this thing, but I can't fit it until I have a hub built. So we'll put these brackets on and attack, get ready for their weld as well. Same thing on the top one's real quick, tiny weld, so that we don't heat our bushings up. Now we're switching to the lower control arm. Now in the previous pickup point brackets that I had, if you remember, there were 2 bends in it that just didn't quite work out. So this system I'm going with is a 2-piece bracket. One part of the bracket is put into press and bent. The other bend will just be created by welding it together. And you can see this little bracket also has a little notch out of it with a welded in nut, a captured nut, because it fits, as you can see, right up tight against the little 45-degree diagonal brace in the subframe. And then I fit the A-arm into this thing, the control arm, so I can get the spacing perfect, mark it, and take the brackets off and put them into position. Now with the control arm out of the way, I can go ahead and tack weld it as well. And I don't know where I just walked off to, but just get back here and get your job done. Just tack welding those little tips that come down. I have a little more control over the tack welds with the TIG welder. Get a nice little round tack welds. I will likely be going back over this with the MIG welder. Got a whole bunch of new parts for the MIG welder, trying to get it to run much more smoother and better feed, because this is going to be miles of welding to get all these brackets completely fixed. Okay, now we got our subframe brackets on. We're going to switch and rebuild our exhaust pipe that was done in a previous episode but had some problems. The main one being that I had to relocate the turbos a little bit, and that's all it took to make waste of the exhaust system. So in this case, I have a couple of stainless steel plates that fit onto the turbochargers that mark the output and the wastegate output. And then I just purchased a bunch of pre-made bends with swedged and expanded pipes so that I can fit them all nicely together without having to try to go to the bender and produce some extremely complex bends. And I don't even have the dies to make this tight of a bend on this 2-inch pipe. So like I said, pre-purchased bends makes a nice easy way to fit this anyway. This is what all the training for was when you were a kid and you played the game of plumbing or pipe fitting, whatever the game was. So just bring one end, try to meet in the center, and then all I have to do is cut one straight length to fill that gap. And I'll have the first run done out of that second turbocharger. Fit it in there. That keeps dropping down. I need something to hold it in position. Get a couple of wedges, prop it up. Number 1 done. Going on to number 2. Same thing. I got these gummy old labels on these pipes though. Get those off. The magic of video editing, you don't get to have to spend the time watching me go to the cutter and chop these pipes off. You just get to see all the fun of fitting. And there they are. The run's pretty much done. So the only thing to do now is to fit a couple of smaller pipes. These are my wastegate purge lines. And they will be dumping into the main exhaust line, of course, rather than 2 atmosphere. I'll also be taking this over to the bench and drilling holes and putting in bungs for my O2 sensors, a couple of studs to hold a heat shield by that shock absorber. And of course, most of the fitting of these turbo purge lines, I'll have to drill some larger holes and fit them. So a lot of that's going to be done on the bench. And I'm not going to show you the whole 3 or 4 hours of welding that this thing took to actually finish all the welds up. But before I can take it over and do the final work on the bench, I need to tack weld the whole thing together. So each pipe, each joint has to have 3 tack welds. Of course, if you don't have 3, then you might have a twist or a hinge bend when you try to move the thing. So 3 tack welds spaced out as best you can keeps them pretty rigid and solid as it's going to be when it goes back into the car. It's also nice to be able to take it out to weld it, because getting to the bottom one's tough when you're even just tack welding it. Imagine trying to weld the thing in place on the car. Luckily this second round I'd learned a few things from the first exhaust system that I built. One being, give me at least another half inch gap between the 2 pipes so I can get my torch in there to complete the welds around those circumference. I got one fitting here that keeps wanting to pop back into that crossover, so get some help holding it. Now this thing's tack welded and now pretty rigid. I'm going to go ahead and fit one of these turbo purge lines down while I have it here, and you can see it in the camera. So let's finish this tack welding up and get to that. Okay, finally. Here we go. So fitting this purge line into the wastegate hole, mark it onto the larger pipe of the exhaust system itself. Same thing in number 2 turbo. Now this pipe has a little bit of a problem that it's kind of interfering with one of the bolts to go in and hold that stainless steel faceplate onto the turbocharger, so I'm going to have to cut a slice in it. Put a little bit of a bend so that it comes out a little straighter and then drops down to the point where it's going to meet the exhaust pipe. Take it over the bench, weld that little slot that created our slight 9-degree bend. Once we have that little slot all welded back up, we can take it over and try it again on the complete system. Looks like it's going to be a go. So now that I have this marked, I'm going to go ahead and cut my larger hole. I don't have a hole saw to match this, and even then the little bit of an oval hole, so just going to do it with the old manual drill bit, perforate the edge, grind between all the holes, and then once you get the plug out, I'll take an air grinder and make it nice and smooth, trial and fit until it all works together. Like I said, I'm not going to go and show you all that welding and fitting this on the bench. You go back to the old video if you want to see more of the same. But anyway, once we get these plugs out, this thing will all be coming off, going over to the bench to get welded up. Fits, let's move it. Undo all the bolts. Get our rubber donuts unhooked from the crossover. And it's free.
All right, so there you have it, and we have it all tack welded together. And while I'm giving you one last little tour across this thing, I'm going to put a link up to a video right here that'll give you an overview of the exhaust system when we did it the first time. Maybe there'll be something in there that you missed in this build of the exhaust. You can put the two together and see the whole process anyway. Anyway, thanks for stopping by. Come back and see us again.